Comfort feels harmless, but it is one of the most effective ways weakness survives. It does not arrive as failure or chaos. It arrives as softness, as permission to delay, as the quiet voice that says, later is fine. Comfort convinces you that nothing is urgent, that there is always more time, that effort can wait. In this state, the body relaxes, the mind wanders, and the will slowly loses its sharpness. Nothing breaks immediately, which is why comfort is dangerous. It weakens you without announcing itself. When you choose comfort repeatedly, you train your nervous system to avoid resistance. The moment something feels heavy, uncomfortable, or demanding, your system searches for escape. This is how weakness becomes a habit, not through one big decision, but through hundreds of small choices to sit instead of stand, to delay instead of act, to distract instead of focus. Over time, effort begins to feel abnormal, and ease feels like a right. The more you protect yourself from discomfort, the less capable you become of handling it. Comfort dulls your awareness. When life is too soft, you stop noticing what needs work. You stop seeing your own inefficiency, your lack of discipline, your unrealized potential. Comfort creates a false sense of stability. You feel safe, but you are not strong. And safety without strength is fragile. The moment pressure appears, the structure collapses. What you avoided training now demands payment. Weakness thrives in comfort because comfort removes the need for decision. You do not have to choose discipline if nothing challenges you. You do not have to develop patience if everything is immediate. You do not have to build endurance if you stop whenever it hurts. In comfort, the muscles of character are never used, and unused muscles do not stay neutral. They shrink. Comfort also distorts your relationship with pain. Pain becomes something to fear rather than something to learn from. Instead of seeing discomfort as a signal for growth, you treat it as a warning to retreat. This changes how you interpret effort. Hard work begins to feel like suffering. Discipline begins to feel like cruelty. Responsibility begins to feel like a burden placed on you rather than a role you choose. In this mindset, weakness feels justified. The weak version of you does not ask for destruction. It asks for ease. It asks for rest before effort, reward before work, understanding before accountability. It frames comfort as self-care and avoidance as wisdom. Slowly, standards lower. What once felt unacceptable becomes normal. What once required effort now feels impossible. Comfort does not steal your strength all at once. It negotiates it away piece by piece. When comfort dominates your life, your inner voice changes. It becomes softer, more forgiving, more rationalizing. It explains why today is not the right day. It explains why circumstances are unfair. It explains why you deserve a break. And sometimes you do. But when comfort becomes the default response, breaks turn into escapes, and escapes turn into identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who cannot handle pressure, cannot endure difficulty, cannot change. Strength cannot be built in comfort, because strength is a response to resistance. Without resistance, there is nothing to rise against. There is no reason to sharpen focus, no need to regulate emotion, no opportunity to test integrity. Comfort keeps you untested, and what is untested is unreliable. When life demands something from you, comfort offers no preparation. Every time you choose comfort over effort, you reinforce a pattern. You teach yourself that discomfort is optional and growth is negotiable. Over time, this belief settles deep. You begin to avoid situations that might expose your limits. You choose familiarity over progress, safety over expansion, ease over capability. The weak self grows not because you are incapable, but because you have trained it to survive. To outgrow weakness, comfort must be challenged, not eliminated, but controlled. Comfort should be a tool, not a ruler. When comfort decides your actions, weakness leads. When you decide to step into discomfort intentionally, strength begins to take shape. This shift is not dramatic. It happens quietly, in ordinary moments, when you choose effort without emotion, discipline without reward, action without guarantee. Discipline does not arrive with motivation. Waiting for motivation is one of the most common ways people delay change. Motivation is emotional, unstable, and dependent on mood, environment, and external encouragement. Some days it appears strong, other days it disappears completely. If discipline required motivation, consistency would be impossible. Discipline begins in the absence of desire, when there is no excitement, no emotional push, and no internal reward. Most people believe they must feel ready before they act. This belief gives emotions authority over behavior. When emotions lead, action becomes inconsistent. When energy is high, effort feels easy. When energy is low, effort stops. Discipline breaks this pattern by reversing the order. Action comes first, feeling follows later. You move not because you want to, but because the action itself is required. When motivation is gone, excuses become louder. The mind starts calculating comfort, efficiency, and fairness. It asks why now, why today, why you? Discipline does not argue with these questions. It does not negotiate. It treats the task as non-optional. This removes emotional debate. When something is non-negotiable, it gets done regardless of internal resistance. Discipline begins with structure. You decide in advance what must be done and when. This decision is made in a calm moment, not in the moment of resistance. When the time arrives, you follow the structure instead of your mood. This is how discipline protects you from yourself. It creates a boundary between intention and impulse. Without motivation, actions feel heavy. The body resists. The mind complains. This resistance is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that discipline is working. The weak self depends on emotional fuel. When that fuel is removed, it loses control. The stronger self does not need to feel inspired. It only needs clarity. Discipline trains trust in yourself. Each time you act without motivation, you prove that your behavior is not controlled by emotion. This builds self-respect. You begin to see yourself as reliable, not talented, not gifted, but dependable. Dependability is a form of strength. It means you can be counted on even when conditions are not ideal. Motivation seeks reward. Discipline seeks alignment. You act because the action matches the person you are becoming, not because it feels good. This shift changes how effort is experienced. The work may still be difficult, but it becomes meaningful. You are no longer chasing a feeling. You are practicing a standard. When discipline begins without motivation, progress becomes steady instead of explosive. There are no emotional highs, but there are also no collapses. You stop starting over. You stop needing to reset. Small actions accumulate. The mind learns that discomfort does not require escape. It learns that effort can exist without drama. Many people wait for confidence before acting. Discipline does not wait. Confidence is built through evidence, not thought. Each disciplined action becomes proof. Over time, this proof replaces doubt. You do not need to believe in yourself. You need to show yourself, repeatedly, that you act even when it is inconvenient. The absence of motivation forces you to rely on systems rather than feelings. Systems remove decision fatigue. You do not wake up asking what you feel like doing. You wake up knowing what must be done. This clarity reduces mental noise. Life becomes simpler, not easier, but clearer. Discipline without motivation also reveals priorities. When you act without desire, you discover what truly matters to you. What you continue to do without emotional reward is what is aligned with your deeper values. Everything else falls away. This is how discipline shapes identity, not through intensity, but through repetition under resistance. Action is often delayed by the belief that readiness must come first. The mind wants certainty before movement. It wants assurance that effort will succeed, that discomfort will be manageable, that results will justify the cost. This belief feels logical, but it creates paralysis. Readiness becomes a moving target, always just out of reach. The longer you wait, the more unprepared you feel, because readiness is not something you discover through thinking. It is something you build through action. The idea of waiting until you feel ready gives fear a respectable disguise. Fear does not say stop. It says prepare more. It says learn a little longer, think a little deeper, plan a little better. While these suggestions sound responsible, they often function as avoidance. The mind stays busy, but the body stays still. Progress requires movement, not perfection. Acting before you feel ready forces exposure. You step into uncertainty without guarantees. This exposure is uncomfortable, but it is essential. Without exposure, your nervous system never adapts. Without adaptation, confidence cannot form. Confidence is not a prerequisite for action. It is a consequence of surviving action repeatedly. When you act early, mistakes become teachers instead of threats. You learn faster because feedback is immediate. Waiting to feel ready delays this feedback. It keeps learning theoretical instead of experiential. You may understand what to do, but you do not yet know how it feels to do it. This gap between knowing and doing is where hesitation grows. The weak self depends on readiness as permission. It wants internal agreement before external effort. The stronger self understands that agreement comes later. It moves forward with partial clarity, trusting that understanding will sharpen through use. This is how skill is built. No one becomes capable by waiting for comfort. Acting without readiness also changes your relationship with control. When you wait, you try to control outcomes before they happen. When you act, you accept uncertainty and focus on response instead. You shift from outcome-based thinking to process-based engagement. This shift reduces anxiety because you are no longer responsible for everything at once. You are only responsible for the next step. Early action trains adaptability. When conditions change, you adjust instead of freezing. Waiting for readiness trains rigidity. You expect circumstances to align with your expectations. When they do not, you hesitate again. Action-first behavior builds resilience because it normalizes imperfection. Readiness is often confused with confidence. Confidence is not a feeling you access. It is a pattern you develop. Each time you act despite uncertainty, you create evidence that you can handle difficulty. This evidence accumulates quietly. One day, you notice that situations that once intimidated, you no longer hold the same power. This is not because you waited long enough, but because you moved early and learned along the way. The longer you delay action, the heavier it feels. Tasks gain emotional weight the more they are postponed. The mind fills the space with imagined difficulty. Acting early prevents this accumulation. You face reality while it is still manageable. Even if the task is hard, it is rarely as hard as the mind predicts. Acting before readiness also clarifies intention. When you stay in planning mode, goals remain abstract. Once you act, the goal becomes real. You see what you actually want, not what you thought you wanted. Some paths lose their appeal once experienced. Others reveal depth you could not imagine from the outside. Action filters illusion from truth. This approach builds momentum. Movement creates energy. The first step is often the heaviest because it carries all the doubt. After that, effort becomes directional. You are no longer stuck deciding whether to move. You are already moving. This momentum reduces internal resistance. Acting early teaches humility. You accept that you will not do everything well. You allow yourself to be a beginner. This removes the pressure of identity. You are not proving worth. You are practicing capability. The need to feel ready is often the need to protect self-image. Action exposes imperfection, but it also creates growth. When you act without readiness, you shift authority from emotion to intention. You decide based on values, not comfort. This decision strengthens self-trust. You begin to rely less on internal signals and more on chosen direction. Over time, the mind learns to follow rather than lead, and hesitation loses its influence. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the absence of unnecessary reaction. Most weakness is not physical or intellectual. It is emotional noise, constant inner commentary, constant judgment, constant explanation. When the mind is loud, energy leaks in every direction. Nothing gathers, nothing settles. Silence is the condition that allows strength to consolidate. The weak self reacts immediately. It speaks quickly, defends itself, explains itself, proves itself. Every reaction feels necessary. Every opinion feels urgent. This urgency creates exhaustion. When you respond to everything, you give everything access to you. Silence removes that access. It creates space between stimulus and response, and in that space, strength is formed. Silence trains control over impulse. When something triggers you and you choose not to react, you interrupt a habitual pattern. The body wants release. The mind wants expression. Silence denies both, not as suppression, but as discipline. You learn that not every thought needs a voice, and not every emotion needs action. In silence, awareness increases. When you stop filling the space with words, you begin to notice patterns. You notice how often you seek validation. You notice how often you speak to reduce discomfort. You notice how much of your communications is driven by fear of being misunderstood or overlooked. These observations are uncomfortable, but they are necessary. You cannot correct what you cannot see. Silence builds inner stability. When you are quiet internally, external chaos loses influence. Other people's opinions, reactions, and moods stop pulling you in different directions. You are less reactive, less defensive, less eager to correct or convince. This stability is not passive. It is grounded. It allows you to choose responses deliberately instead of automatically. The weak self confuses silence with loss. It believes that if you do not speak, you will disappear. That if you do not assert, you will be overlooked. That if you do not react, you will be defeated. This belief comes from insecurity. True strength does not fear being unseen. It does not require constant confirmation. It knows its direction. Silence conserves energy. Every argument avoided, every explanation withheld, every unnecessary reaction prevented preserves mental clarity. That clarity can then be directed toward effort, discipline, and growth. Many people are exhausted not from work, but from constant emotional output. Silence reduces this drain. In silence, discomfort surfaces. Without distraction, the mind confronts itself. Doubt, impatience, and restlessness become visible. This is why silence is avoided. It exposes inner weakness, but exposure is the first step to transformation. When you sit with discomfort without reacting, you strengthen tolerance. Tolerance becomes endurance. Silence also sharpens listening. When you are not preparing to respond, you actually hear. You notice tone, intention, and inconsistency. This makes you less manipulable. Weakness is often exploited through emotional reaction. Silence removes that leverage. Choosing silence does not mean disengagement. It means selective engagement. You speak when your words have purpose. You act when your action is aligned. This selectivity increases impact. Fewer words carry more weight. Fewer reactions carry more authority. Even silence is developed through practice. Sitting still when you want stimulation. Observing thoughts without following them. Allowing emotions to rise and fall without expression. Each time you do this, you train self-regulation. Self-regulation is the foundation of strength. When silence becomes familiar, urgency fades. You no longer feel rushed to respond or explain. This calmness is often mistaken for indifference, but it is control. You are not detached from life. You are centered within it. Silence creates a boundary. It separates what matters from what does not. Many conflicts dissolve when you refuse to feed them. Many distractions lose power when you do not chase them. In this way, silence simplifies life. Through silence, the stronger self gains presence. Presence is felt, not announced. It does not need volume. It does not need display. It is recognized through composure, restraint, and consistency. When you are silent by choice, not by fear, you demonstrate mastery over yourself. Pain is not an obstacle to growth. It is the requirement. Every meaningful expansion of capacity demands that something familiar be left behind. That leaving behind is experienced as pain. The body resists strain, the mind resists uncertainty, and the identity resists change. This resistance is not a sign of failure. It is the signal that growth is taking place. Most people spend their lives trying to avoid pain. They structure routines, relationships, and goals around comfort and predictability. In doing so, they also avoid development. What is never challenged never adapts. Muscles that are not stressed weaken. Minds that are not tested become fragile. Character that is never pressured remains shallow. Pain forces focus. When something hurts, attention becomes sharp. Distractions lose appeal. You are brought fully into the moment. This intensity is useful. It strips away excess and reveals what matters. In comfort, priorities blur. In pain, they clarify. There is physical pain, which teaches the body its limits, and there is psychological pain, which teaches the mind its patterns. Both are instructors. Physical discomfort shows you how to breathe under pressure, how to regulate effort, how to remain present when the body wants escape. Mental discomfort shows you how attached you are to control, approval, and certainty. Each form of pain exposes weakness, not to shame you, but to show you where work is needed. The weak self interprets pain as punishment. It asks what went wrong. It seeks relief immediately. The stronger self interprets pain as information. It asks what is being trained. This difference in interpretation determines outcome. The same pain that strengthens one person breaks another. The difference is not toughness. It is understanding. Pain humbles. It removes illusion. When effort hurts, you are forced to confront reality. You see how far you actually are from your potential. This can feel discouraging, but it is grounding. Growth begins with accurate self-assessment. Pain provides that assessment honestly. Avoiding pain delays this clarity. You can tell yourself stories about who you are and what you could do, but pain does not accept stories. It responds only to preparation and presence. When pain arrives and you are unprepared, it exposes the gap between intention and capability. Pain also builds patience. Progress under discomfort is slow. Results are not immediate. You learn to continue without reinforcement. This develops endurance. Endurance is the ability to remain engaged without emotional reward. It is one of the most valuable traits for long-term growth. Through pain, discipline is refined. You learn the difference between necessary suffering and unnecessary strain. You learn when to push and when to adjust. This discernment only comes through experience. Comfort cannot teach it. Pain changes identity. When you endure what you once avoided, your self-image updates. You no longer see yourself as someone who escapes difficulty. You see yourself as someone who can stay. This shift is subtle but powerful. It increases self-trust. The price of growth is paid in advance. You feel the cost before you see the benefit. This is why many quit. They expect reward too soon. Those who continue understand that pain is the transaction. You give effort, discomfort, and time, and in return you receive strength later. Pain also creates respect. Not from others, but from yourself. You know what you have faced. You know what you did not avoid. This internal respect is stable. It does not depend on praise. It is earned privately. When pain is accepted rather than resisted, it loses some of its power. It becomes something you work with instead of something you fight. This cooperation reduces suffering. Pain remains, but panic disappears. Growth without pain is fantasy. Expansion requires pressure. Pressure creates adaptation. Adaptation creates strength. When you understand this sequence, pain no longer feels like an enemy. It feels like a gate. Every time you step through it, capacity increases. Consistency is not intensity. Intensity is emotional. It comes in waves, driven by excitement, fear, or urgency. It burns hot and fades quickly. Consistency is quieter. It does not rely on mood. It does not seek attention. It is built through repetition, through showing up the same way regardless of how you feel. Weakness thrives on intensity because intensity excuses absence. When the feeling is gone, effort stops. Consistency removes that excuse. The weak self prefers dramatic effort. It wants transformation to feel powerful and visible. It wants big actions that confirm identity. But dramatic effort is unsustainable. It demands emotional fuel. When life becomes ordinary again, the weak self loses interest. Consistency, on the other hand, accepts the ordinary. It works within it. It makes progress in unremarkable moments. Small actions repeated daily reshape behavior. They bypass resistance because they do not feel overwhelming. The mind is less likely to rebel against manageable effort. Over time, these small actions accumulate. What felt insignificant at first becomes decisive. Weakness is not defeated by force. It is outlasted. Consistency trains patience. Results are delayed. Progress is subtle. You must continue without visible confirmation. This is difficult for the weak self, which seeks immediate validation. By continuing anyway, you train tolerance for delay. This tolerance is a form of strength. Consistency also simplifies decision-making. You do not ask whether to act. The action is already decided. This reduces mental friction. The mind no longer debates effort. It follows routine. When routine is aligned with growth, progress becomes automatic. Through consistency, identity changes. You stop seeing yourself as someone who tries. You begin to see yourself as someone who does. This shift is not based on belief, but on evidence. Each repeated action reinforces the image. Weakness loses credibility when contradicted daily. Consistency exposes resistance gradually. Some days are harder than others. Some days effort feels pointless. These moments reveal underlying weakness. By acting anyway, you weaken the weak self's influence. It learns that its objections are ignored. Intense effort can feel heroic. Consistent effort feels humble. There is no drama, no story to tell. This humility is important. It keeps ego out of the process. Ego seeks recognition. Consistency seeks alignment. Consistency builds reliability. You become dependable to yourself. This trust compounds. When challenges appear, you do not panic. You rely on what you have practiced. Consistency creates a foundation that intensity cannot provide. Weakness often hides behind potential. You imagine what you could do if conditions were perfect. Consistency replaces imagination with proof. It turns possibility into reality step by step. There is no leap, only accumulation. Consistency also creates momentum, not the explosive momentum of excitement, but the steady momentum of habit. Once established, this momentum requires less effort to maintain than to start. The hardest part is beginning. After that, continuation becomes easier. By repeating disciplined actions, you reduce emotional dependence. You no longer need to feel motivated to act. Action becomes normal. This normalization is powerful. What was once difficult becomes routine. Consistency defeats the weak self because it leaves no room for negotiation. The weak self thrives in exceptions. It waits for special circumstances. Consistency eliminates special circumstances. Every day becomes a training day. Over time, consistency reveals results that intensity promised but never delivered. Strength appears quietly. Capacity expands without announcement. You realize you can handle more than before, not because of one great effort, but because of many small ones repeated, without interruption. You do not outgrow weakness through intention or understanding, but through daily confrontation with yourself. Comfort must be challenged. Discipline must exist without motivation. Action must come before readiness. Silence must replace reaction. Pain must be accepted as the cost of becoming capable. And consistency must be maintained when intensity fades. Each of these is a practice, not a concept. Together, they form a way of living where excuses lose authority and responsibility becomes normal. When you stop negotiating with the weak version of yourself, life becomes simpler, clearer, and more demanding in the right way. Strength is not something you discover one day. It is something you build quietly through repeated choices until the weak you no longer recognizes the person you have become